Accessibility and disability in higher education. Equal access to post-secondary education for students with disabilities is supported in some countries by legislation. Canada is one of these countries. It is still challenging for some students with disabilities to fully participate in mainstream education settings. Defining and responding to the needs of those with a disability is a tricky issue for post-secondary education. According to the National Education Association of Disabled Students, access to post-secondary education is an integral component of achieving income security. Yet, people with disabilities are less likely to attend and complete post-secondary education than those without disabilities. Students with disabilities have the potential to be successful in post-secondary education, and the support they receive from their institution can play a large role in their success. Canadian universities have gone a long way to eliminate the physical obstacles that present barriers for students with disabilities, but many of those students have invisible disabilities that require different types of adjustments. The first obstacle to accommodating a hidden disability is identifying it. Invisible disabilities are hard to notice and sometimes even harder to diagnose. The post-secondary education institutions in general are accommodating and promote a feeling of acceptance, but students with invisible disabilities face social and organizational barriers. These barriers are related to negative social attitudes and comments about disabilities. These attitudinal barriers take a variety of forms, including ignorance, misperceptions, stigma, discrimination, and stereotyping. That's the reason that most of these students try to pass as normal. There is no physical disability. Organizational barriers include big, noisy lecture halls. The education system is built only for one type of learner, from which they feel oppressed. 80% of disabilities are invisible to the naked eye. Here are three different types of hidden disabilities. Learning disabilities. Learning disabilities impact mental health. Students can be separated from their classmates, creating a sense of isolation and feeling of inadequacy. The 2012 Canadian Survey on Disability found that among adults with a learning disability aged 15 and older who currently were or had recently been in school, almost all, 98%, stated that their disability directly impacted their educational experience. The most common impacts reported by those with a learning disability included taking longer to achieve education milestones, taking fewer courses, and changing their choices of courses or career. Many also reported social difficulties, including being avoided or excluded or being bullied. Mental health. Mental health issues are not easily handled. That's why specialized counselors, psychologists, and psychiatrists need to be hired. One way that post-secondary education have in place is one-on-one counseling for students with mental health issues. Better work can be done through peer support programs where students can volunteer. Crisis emergency counseling should be available by appointment. More information in form of books or online resources can be available. Of course, this brings out the problem of the high cost to maintain these programs. The Mental Health Commission of Canada reports that in any given year, 1 in 5 people in Canada experiences a mental health problem or illness, with a cost to the economy of well in exceed of $50 billion. Hearing loss. Hearing loss, a person who is hard of hearing becomes frustrated and isolated in social situations. Hearing aids enhance hearing, but do not correct it in the same way that glasses correct eyesight. The effort to follow a conversation leaves a hard of hearing person exhausted and depressed. Hearing loss has a profound impact on an individual's ability to communicate with the world around them. Another issue that I want to bring up is the transition from high school to post-secondary education. Transition from high school to post-secondary education is hard for any student to make the leap, but especially for students with disabilities who may require additional consideration and accommodation. It is imperative that students with disabilities receive timely and relevant information to help make a smooth and successful transition into post-secondary education. Being uninformed or unprepared can lead to unmet needs, emotional stress, or poor academic performance. Web accessibility. Higher education institutions still do not meet the demand for digital accessibility. Web accessibility is another concern for higher education. Students who have difficulty using the learning technologies may be disadvantaged in their studies. Higher education institutions still do not meet the demands, particularly the use of web platforms and digital materials for their disabled students, according to a white paper published by 3Play Media, which is called Roadmap to Web Accessibility in Higher Education. Accessibility laws, policies, standards, regulation, and guidelines. Canada has a number of laws in place that protect the human rights for Canadians with disabilities. Services for students with disabilities within post-secondary education are governed by the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedom and provincial human rights statuses. In 2005, the Government of Ontario passed the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disability Act with the aim of making Ontario barrier-free for individuals with disabilities. An overachieving act protecting the rights of those with disabilities that does not exist yet in Canada. Employment and Social Development Canada lists 13 acts and regulations relating to disabilities, each with its own standard or regulation. Currently, a person who qualifies for support under one service may at the same time be denied under another. A primary goal of new federal accessibility legislation will be to create definitions and policies that apply throughout federal government activities. Spotlight on Invisible Disabilities is a 2-year project where invisible disability stakeholders will be consulted. In her message, Canada's Minister of Sports and Persons with Disabilities talks about the consultation process that will help the development of new accessibility legislation. Here are some of the important points. Expand definition of disability to include invisible disabilities. Increase education to expand understanding and acceptance of those with disabilities. Enhance accessibility to new technologies. Making higher education more accessible for students with disabilities goes a long way toward supporting student access and success, an emerging issue in post-secondary education. Thus, it is recommended that universities continue to promote awareness about various forms of disabilities. Higher education is always changing. Through system and institutional design and transformation, Canadian institutions should address the 21st century needs of students with invisible disabilities. And here are my references. Thank you.